Hi everyone, Magnus here, back again today with a free lesson with Valentin. The plan for today is to go through Puzzlik, which is the tool that he created. I will remind you guys, I do have a promotion code. If you want to take a look at it down in the description, you can get 15% off. I think it's a really good tool. And after that, we're going to be looking at the Scandinavian defense for white, how you can play against it, followed by some endgames, rook endgames specifically, seeing how you can pressure them to the max, and finally finish with a nice calculation exercise, as I often like to do at the end of a lesson. Also, if any of you would be interested in some one-to-one lessons, please do send an email. I'll leave it in the description below. So we are now back with another free chess lesson for you guys. I'm here with Valentin. Would you like to say hi?
Yeah, hello guys.
So we're just going to be starting off doing some puzzles, warming up, as I would always recommend that you do at the start of any chess activity. We're going to be doing some puzzles using Puzzlik, which is a tool that Valentin himself has created. I think it's really helpful. It will get positions from your own games, very, very stylized, and therefore you can clearly see what you're going to be missing, and if you can patch those holes and fix those tactical problems that you have, then you're going to be a much better chess player. So let's get started with this first puzzle here. Valentin, this is from a game that you actually played this week, and there was a missed checkmate. You are obviously winning materially, but I'd be interested if you can try and find the checkmate here. I think you were quite low on time, and you might have actually flagged in this game, but if you can have a forced checkmate, then it doesn't really matter how low on time you have, so you've got to go for the king.
Yeah, so here obviously I see that the rook is hanging, but since the prompt is saying that it's a missed mate, then I'm looking more closer to the king's side. Yeah, and it's pinned. Yeah. Yeah. So, like, for first thing that I see when I look at this position is obviously to go something like king c2, but obviously it's not the move because here we are looking more for the mate. So, yeah, I'm looking now on the knight moves, and on the, yeah, I think knight h6 creates the mating net for the black king, and then essentially, yeah, we are trying to go to rook h7, and it should be mate. And if there, then we can just check with the knight on f7, I believe. Oh my god, that's so bad.
it's okay, but I think essentially what I would like to suggest is that we look for the absolute most forcing moves first every time when it's a checkmate puzzle in particular. So you always want to start with the most aggressive attacking moves. Knight h3 is a nice and stylish move, because, you know, it blocks off the king and you're saying, now I'm going to checkmate you. But it's often a lot more effective to try and find the forcing lines first, and because if you can calculate those to the very end and they end up winning, it doesn't matter if they take more moves or they're less efficient, because you know that for sure it's going to work. So let's start from there.
So rook h7, king g8, then maybe knight there, but yeah, knight there, king f8, and then rook h8.
Rook h8, that is a checkmate, yeah. I think that should be good. This is also a checkmate because the bishop is covering this square, so it looks like all roads end up leading to Rome. But yeah, this is exactly what I'm saying. So you want to look for the most forcing sequence. So all that was inverting the move order. You found the correct two moves, right? You know that you're going for the black king, but you just had to reverse engineer it so that it's more forcing, which is often a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, this is a good advice to, like, usually just reverse the move order and see. But when you have like 5 seconds on the clock,
that's true. Yeah,
it's not the option.
Yeah, it can be a bit difficult. But I guess if you have 5 seconds on your clock, you want to go for the forcing moves, which are the checks. So if you can just check, like when you've got all these pieces surrounding your opponent's king, you have these two rooks, this knight, and the bishop nicely placed. You just want to go for the checks, and it's probably going to be a checkmate. So I think that definitely makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I played in the game king before, which was pretty much useless. Okay, so here we are playing as black, I believe. So bishop is hanging. I played bishop d6, which just retreats the bishop. Probably not a bad move, but something is better. Something better was here. Oh, taking the rook! Oh my god!
Yeah, this is just a hanging
how
rook.
I missed that. It's just too far.
Yeah, I mean it happens. The diagonals are often hard to see. I'm assuming you were probably quite low on time in this one as well. So we can probably...
I lost a lot of games because of the time, but I think I'm just getting better on Blitz.
Yeah, I think time management is a skill in and of itself. I've always, whenever I recommend time management skills, I would say try and stay within 10% of your opponent's time, plus or minus, because you don't want to be you don't want to be blitzing out every move and then not using enough time in the critical moments. So generally, when your opponent takes a big think, that's an indicator they've been calculating a lot of stuff, and maybe you should either be calculating on their time or having to come up with something after they make their move. So really, it's just using your opponent as sort of an indicator for how much time you should be spending is definitely a really helpful way to keep track. Okay.
Okay.
So the move rook takes g6 was played here.
Yeah, kind of makes sense. I mean, getting rid of this pawn, but I'm losing my bishop. I thought that maybe it's winning because I have a pawn, but and the king is the opponent king is very far away. So I thought that I have winning chances here.
Yes. I think if your king was, say, over here or there, then it would be a win. But even though their king is very far away, your king is even further, so they will have time to come over and intercept you.
Yeah. Okay, well, looking with fresh eyes on this position, I think we just need to defend the bishop. So it's either rook g, but rook g2 doesn't make sense because he can just follow me with the king, which doesn't. Yeah. So I think rook. Yeah, it should be rook c3.
Yeah, and then you can just sort of hold the fort. Also, the bishop can drop back. And you should be in good shape.
Because bishop very important because it protects the pawn.
Yes.
And and then rook can just pick up the pawn because it's really hard for him to defend the pawn when he's piece down, and he's gonna lose this pawn. So
yeah, exactly.
It's really weak. I don't know why. I mean, yeah, I just decided to give up the bishop because I have a pawn, but it's not that clear that it's weak. It's probably in the draw.
Let's say these two pawns were not on the board and you only had rook and bishop versus rook. I'm sure that you probably know that this is a draw for white, right?
Yes.
But it's actually really, really difficult to defend. And I found most of the time when you have got the rook and the bishop, you can put significant pressure on the white pieces. So this might actually be a good thing to potentially look at in the future. Because these kinds of positions, while they're rare, they do happen. And if you can, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if the position is objectively drawn. If you can put enough challenges to your opponent to the point where they crack, then you win the game. All that you don't see that it was a draw, and then you win. You just see that you ended up winning the game. So I actually think that it's quite an underrated skill to learn how to pressure even in these drawn endgames to the maximum. But yeah, you're correct that you don't have to worry about that because you just have the pawn defended nicely by the bishop. Okay. Do you know how long this has been so far? Because I don't have...
Oh, it was about 9 minutes, which is, I think, reasonable.
So would you be happy to probably move on then, or...?
Sure.
Okay, sounds good. So I was looking to get started with some Scandinavian. I know this is something that you have asked about last week. And you know how the Scandinavian starts. So we have the mainline Scandinavian with knight c3. This is what you play. And this move, queen to a5, is the most common response from your opponents, next to queen d6 and a couple games with queen d8. But I don't think queen d8 is really that testing. It just moves the queen straight back to the home square, and this is not a big deal. So you play the move pawn d4, which is the principled response. You're trying to prevent these central pawn pushes like e5, taking space in the center. And most of your opponents are going knight to f6. They just want to move out their knight, move out their bishop, move the other one out, and castle their king. And you also go for this move knight to f3, which is, once again, the most principled response, fighting for the center, developing your knight, potentially develop the bishop in the future. And what's interesting about this one is that a lot of your opponents are going for this move, bishop to g4. And this move, while being very, very common, especially at like club levels and intermediate levels, it's actually not a very good move. And the reason for that is because you can hit it with the move pawn to h3. And I know a couple of your opponents have been interested by this move, queen to h5. And also a lot of people that play the Scandinavian, this would be a very enticing move because you're putting lots of pressure on this pin here, as well as exploiting this pin on the h-file. And I'd be interested to know, maybe you're already familiar with this, but white is actually much, much better, pretty much winning in this position. According to there's one specific trick. So do you know it? If you know it, then just let me know, and if you don't, then you can try and find it. It should be doable.
So I'm not really. I mean, I think I saw this position somewhere. Maybe it was in my one of my games. But looking at it right now, I think the move is like knight b5, just counter-attacking the c7 pawn and threatening to fork. But I'm a little bit worried that they can just defend it with either with knight d5 or knight a6, developing the knight and preparing long castle maybe.
You make a good point. Knight a6 is probably the best going for long castles. I'm gonna bring attention over to here, and the question is whether or not this pin on the rook is actually valid. Because obviously, I've talked previously about whether or not your opponent can make a plan. In this case, the plan is that they want to pin down the h-file, and they also want to pin down this diagonal. But every time your opponent makes a move, you have to evaluate whether or not their plan is actually good or if it's bad. And if it's bad, then you can actually just let them self-destruct. So the question we have to be able to evaluate is whether or not we actually can take this bishop. So I'd be interested to know what you think of this.
I think it's interesting. We are going to be down in exchange, but we are up in development. We are we have 3 pieces developed, and if we, for example, we will spend another tempo to develop a dark squared bishop, for example, to f4, and then we are pretty much 2 moves away from long castle, and we are counter-attacking the c7 pawn. So I mean, I'm not sure that it's the best continuation, but it's definitely something that needed to be calculated. So
you can definitely play this way with bishop to f4. I think white should probably still be a little bit better in that position that you suggested. But if I were to tell you that after taking the bishop and the queen takes, that there's a concrete win, what would that make you think?
Okay, concrete win. So concrete win in this position would be to somehow trap the queen, but I'm not sure it's possible.
You're on the right lines.
So okay, bishop g5 maybe.
What does bishop g5 do?
Okay, it doesn't really. I thought that we have to restrict the h4 square, but it's actually already.
It's already covered.
Already covered by the knight. Okay, let me think for a moment. So takes.
I can give a hint that you have to be able to attack the queen on h1 in order to trap it. If you can't attack the queen, then it can just sit on h1 forever, and it wouldn't be trapped effectively, even if it has no moves.
I'm looking now at the other knight rotation, like knight c3 to e2 and then to g3. Maybe this is like interesting approach but the problem is that he can capture the pawn on on g4. So, and the h5 square will be free to go. Oh no, the knight is covering this. Oh my god. Yeah, that's nice.
It attacks the queen and covers the escape square. So essentially the sequence goes like this. Takes, and the queen is in fact trapped. h6 covered, h4's covered, h2's covered, and g1's also covered. So all the squares are guarded. Slightly better try for black is this move, knight to e4, trying to stop the knight from getting to g3. But what would be your approach here?
Probably to attack the knight with the queen.
Yeah, queen d3. And there's no way to defend the knight with f5 because your pawn can capture it. So that pawn on g4, either they take it and they get trapped, or they leave it alive and then it prevents the pawn going to f5. So I just thought this was a nice trick that you should probably be aware of. And if they play the move bishop to h5, which is the most common move, queen h5 is actually one of the second most common moves, by the way. People fall into this trap all the time because they think that the pin works, but it actually doesn't. You can actually follow up with this move pawn to g4. And I don't know, do you have reservations against this move, Valentin?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, I usually reluctant to play it when my king is so underdeveloped, and I don't want to weaken my king so much. But I mean, the black pieces are not so scary. They could try to sack the knight on g4 and create the spin, but it's not so scary when my bishop is still alive, my white squared bishop. So, but I wonder if they sack the knight, should they still go g3, g2, or should they go to e2 in order to break the pin? If they sack the knight on g4 and
I don't think sacking the knight's very good. You can just play bishop e2.
I don't think it either, but
this sacrifice doesn't do a whole lot. You can just take it, break the pin, continue your development, and castle long. You don't want to castle short into the open squares, but you're perfectly fine here. Black has no development, so they can't go for a sacrifice like this. So essentially, after g4, bishop g6 is forced, and I'd be interested if you...
And I can develop to g2.
You can play bishop g2, but I'm just going to explain the main line to you and show you, because it's not very intuitive, I'm going to be honest, and that's why I've got this second line that I think you'll probably like a lot, because the plans flow a lot more simply. But in the main line, you go knight to e5. And the idea is actually not necessarily that you're going to take the bishop. The idea is pretty weird, and it's actually that you're defending this g4 pawn with your knight and your queen. And the point is that after they play something like e6 with this pawn looking to develop their bishop, you're actually going to play the move h4. And you're literally just trying to trap their bishop. And I'm sure you can see that after they play something like h5 to make room for their bishop, what would you do here? I think this should make sense.
Well, the intuition tells me to just push the pawn to g5, but the knight goes to d5 and I have to trade. Oh, I cannot even trade. No. I was actually thinking to d5. Putting more pressure on the c knight, and it's quite unpleasant because the knight is pinned, so I cannot capture. So I have to play bishop d2.
There's something very important you have to know about this move h5 or h6 when there's a bishop on g6 and a knight attacking it. I don't know if you've seen similar positions in the Jabava London when white pushes all their flank pawns up to try and induce a weakness and then captures the light squared bishop. So in this position, for example, by the way, taking on c3, you can either meet with the move queen d2 or just take and play bishop d2. This makes the most sense probably because you would actually emerge a piece up, attacking the queen and the rook is defended. So they can't do that. They would have to take back something like this, and you can simply break the pin, but then go after this g6 and e6 pawns, which are going to be so weak in the long run that black is essentially lost here. I can tell on the analysis it's giving +2. The game is it's actually in a terrible position. Engine suggesting that you can probably play like this with all of these light squared pieces just attacking the weak pawn. The queen also defends this knight here. So can you see that like this structural damage by capturing the bishop is so severe in this opening that white has a winning advantage. You can.
Okay, agree. So it's the same plan even if they go to knight g4, or are there like any differences?
There's essentially no differences other than knight here is even worse, because they're not making any pressure on this knight, so you can once again go for these plans like queen d3. Personally, I slightly prefer bishop d3, queen e2, but both are good. I just think this one's slightly more natural. Okay.
Yeah, that's a nice line.
So essentially, the main line is bishop to b4. And the reasoning for bishop to b4 is that after h5, they want to be able to play this move bishop to e4. And if you play something like here, then they can just drop back. And you'll often get something like this. Actually, taking isn't very good. You probably just want to break the pin. And you get a position like this. They're quite interesting. I don't know what you think of this from the white side. Basically, if black ever castles kingside, you've got a ready-made pawn storm. And black often will try and go long, but they can't really develop the knight because then you'll take the bishop. So they're sort of at a bit of a standoff with these minor pieces here. And your plan's pretty simple. You just want to either get the queen out like this, get the bishop out, and you can castle long or short. It's pretty flexible. But I don't know what do you like this for white, or do you think you might want something simpler?
I feel like there's a lot of attacking potential here, and I kind of like this dilemma for black that they cannot really develop the knight because the pawn is gonna be ruined. And so the only question, so pushing f3, pushing the bishop away is main line.
Yeah,
because it feels pretty dangerous, but yeah.
Okay. These ways that you can properly try and punish the Scandinavian. This is like what the engine gives and all the top players are playing if they want to try and get the most out of a Scandinavian position. But the issue is it gives a lot of imbalance for both sides. So we can take a look at another approach which should look very similar, and that's if the queen goes to DC. Actually, I think this is this is the same line. I just was showing it in a different one. But the other line that I want to show you is this G3 one, and I think you might quite like this one as well. I'll let you decide whether or not you would rather play the main lines, because also it's more likely that your opponent will be aware of the main lines and potentially has experience in it. But then again, not many people play the main lines that accurately at kind of club levels on the way up to 2000, so you can probably still get some good value out of it. But G3 is something that I really started playing just to get out of book and get a really comfortable position for white. So I'm just gonna show this one. And the point of G3 being played early is that you want to get your bishop on this long diagonal, and if black doesn't play c6, then they can't develop their bishop. So black's pretty much always going to play c6 pretty soon after you put your bishop on this diagonal. And what's nice about this setup is that you can play it against the queen a5, queen d6, and queen d8. You can pretty much even play it against the check lines. You just have to block with the knight first. So I don't know if you know about this one where people go queen e6 check. It's pretty weird, but you can still just move your knight out and then fianchetto the bishop. So effectively, this one means that you don't have to learn separate cutting edge theory for each of the main lines, because if you're going to play this one, not everyone is going to go for queen to a5, right? Some people, queen d6, there's this pretty popular line with like queen d6, d4 here, and then a6, and then people go b5, bishop to b7. So you might have to learn that one, and I just think it's a little bit of a pain to invest so much time on something like the Scandinavian, which is already a pretty not the most popular opening in the first place. So I really think this g3 thing's worth picking up. But anyway, you try and get the bishop on this diagonal.
To be completely honest, the main line position feels like more interesting. For some reason, developing bishop to g2 feels counterproductive, because in most, I mean, from my experience, in most of the lines, they do play c6. So it feels like a little bit counterproductive, because our bishop is going to be just bad for the rest of the game.
I have a suggestion in this line, which basically is going to make your bishop one of the best pieces on the board every single time. So I think you'll probably like this one. If you don't, then that's also fine. The main lines are definitely worth picking up. And if you want to learn them move for move, that's what I would have to probably recommend doing, because the main lines are sharp and they will allow black good counter chances if you mess up. But this one, you can just play, there's basically one plan, and if you know that plan, you can execute it every single time. It's very simple. So that's why I'm recommending it. But like I said, if you want to invest the time and you find the main lines to be intuitive and you like them, then absolutely go for that as well. So yeah,
so
after black develop
a3.
Sorry.
The plan here is a3, b4, and
yes,
then b5.
That is one approach. However, there's a really neat little idea that after the bishop moves out, what do you notice the changes about the position after the bishop moves out?
Well, I know this from the Grunfeld, that whenever bishop moves out and this pawn is undefended, we can like trap the rook, as long as we will be able to like distract the pawn on c file. So yeah, I'm looking on something like b4, but before like immediately. Isn't it premature?
What's your follow-up to queen b4?
I thought that rook to b1.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no way for the queen to maintain the defense of the b pawn. After the queen moves back, you're taking on b7. Now this bishop is a monster, and this pawn is poorly defended. Additionally, your rook has already invaded. You can play d3, bishop f4. The queen's now coming in on the b file. And essentially, this opening is all predicated on the fact that you can go b4 and b5 very quickly and start trying to chop down this black structure. And therefore, you'll be able to improve this bishop, which you were correctly pointing out was currently blunted by these light squared pawns. But there is an easy way that you can try and loosen up black position and make things work very nicely. So yes, that's correct. The move is b4. I really like that you came across that move, or at least that move felt logical to you, because it makes so much sense in this kind of position when you're trying to get this bishop nice and active. So the queen will pretty much always
to this move. But the question is that I have about this. So you specifically mentioned bishop f5. Does it work? I mean, the same line for bishop to g4, or is there like any tricks that I need to know? Like,
oh wait, are you saying bishop to g4? No, bishop g4 you can still go for b4. The only difference is bishop g4 is probably a little bit worse, because there will often be situations where the bishop can come under pressure on this square, and also the bishop on f5 is actually doing something in pressuring this c2 pawn, which can often be vulnerable later on if your queen moves. But Also, you can just play a move like h3, ask the bishop what it's doing, and you can even go for g4 and sort of borrow some ideas from the other games. So as an example, it would even be a valid plan to go for something like here, g4, d3, and then knight to f4. And if you can claim that bishop and combine the ideas of b5 to bring this bishop to life, then you can really get a good position. So I don't think the bishop on g4 is really a big deal. Just got to be confident with your pawn pushes and know that this h3 g4 structure with the fianchetto bishop against the Scandinavians are actually pretty good. And another important thing to know is that if they ever play h5, what would you do here?
I mean, the same as in Mainline, I guess. Just push the pawn and then go to knight f5.
Yeah,
knight f4.
Exactly. And it's actually extra unpleasant here because the knight can't go forwards anywhere because you have this pawn on d3 and the bishop on g2 rather than before where you have the pawn on d4 and they can put their knight in the middle. So they'd have to play something horrible like their knight here. If they go here, what would you do?
Okay. Well, I kind of... I wonder if we should play the... I wonder if we should play the pawn to f4, threatening to like... But hold on, no. This is... So I wonder, because the thing is, the bishop doesn't really have any squares. And if we will force them to play like f6, it's just tremendous weakness. The king is weak and it's not even close to the... castling queenside, so that's already going to be a big positional win. But I'm also looking at knight f5 and trying to compare, because knight f5 bishop has knight f4 bishop has f5, and I don't really see the follow-up. So what can we do there?
So there's actually a really interesting idea that I'd like you to be able to know about, which is after knight f4, bishop f5, there's this move g6, which would be really strong.
I was looking at this one. And if bishop takes, then we just take the bishop back.
Exactly. And you can just play this position basically however you want. You can fianchetto, play queen e2, long castle. Essentially, the point is that this structure for black is so awful that you can go down a pawn and be much better. I'll turn on the analysis, +2 for white. Down a pawn +2, that is a fantastic position to have. Because obviously that means the point is black's dark square bishop is just so horrible. If they ever push this e pawn forward, then the e pawn is just going to instantly drop off the board because it just can't be defended. Black can't afford to do that. And otherwise, black can't develop their pieces and castle. Going long is not helpful because they're running straight into the attack. And weirdly enough, after castling, white's super safe because black just has no pieces developed. You're going rook e1, queen e2, bishop out, get the knight in. This is just domination for white. So that's why bishop g5, bishop g4, I don't think it's that good. We're just going to quickly go through the main ideas here because I know that we have to try and move on to the rook endgame, and then I'd also like to give you 5 minutes or so on the calculation at the end. So the move is rook to b1, and this move should make a lot of sense because you want to go b5 and capture, and once you do that, the rook is already going to be on an open file. And I don't know if do you like the look of this position already? You can see that these plans combine very nicely, and this should be quite logical, especially because after this move b5 comes, you can actually leave the tension for a very long time. And the reason this is so annoying for black to deal with is because if they ever develop their knight, then you're capturing and they can't take back with the knight, they'll have to take with the pawn, and you can hit them with this nasty move knight d4. So I'm just going to play out a couple more moves, d3, and black's at a huge dilemma here. How does black finish their development and also deal with this pressure down the b file and potential knight jumps into the middle of the board? And it's actually really difficult. Knight bd7 is still an okay move, but now after takes, I'm sure you can finish off what I was saying. How does white play for a big advantage here?
Yeah, I mean, well, you already said the move. It was knight d4. It looks
Yeah.
logical. It looks simple and effective.
Exactly. Attacks the bishop. Bishop can't move back. Otherwise, this pawn drops, and this bishop is hanging. This rook is now x-rayed. Plus, rook b7 becomes an idea. Super nasty. All these pieces getting skewered. Black's position is just not ready for it. And if you'd want to try and play, I don't even know, something like knight here to defend this pawn, then you can just play simple chess. Finish your development. Black structure is terrible. You can just apply pressure down the E file and the B file. And we can possibly go into some... I'll give you one example game, actually, that was played by some grandmasters. You're probably not going to be getting those kinds of positions, but essentially, if you want to continue just improving your pieces without having to think too much in this position, you're bringing your rook to the E file. You're potentially trying to play moves like queen d2. h3 is a very useful move a lot of the time, trying to take away this g4 square. And maybe you can reposition this knight, because you can see it doesn't have fantastic prospects, but the long run, your idea is that you want to try and eliminate this c6 pawn and then push your two center pawns down the board. And yeah, so that's about all there is to it. You can also come up with ideas like moving your knight out of the way and then trying to mobilize these pawns. And if you can exchange them off, then you'll have one passed pawn. And because they've got their 4 pawns on this side against your 3 pawns, you should have a pretty nice advantage. So basically, it just gives you a comfortable position. You can play it fast, especially because you're trying to improve at rapid chess. As long as you know that you have this plan of going like rook b1, b4, b5, that's going to be really helpful just to have this clear idea and goal of trying to create the weak c pawn.
Yeah, okay. This is a nice idea, and I find myself pretty comfortable on in Grunfeld's position, so I think this line will work well for me. So I will have a look more closely, because so far moves are like logical and kind of easy to find, so shouldn't be too hard to learn it more.
Yeah. So for an example, this was a master game. The master took on z6, didn't have to do this necessarily, but the opponent decided they didn't want the isolated c pawn, and so they took with the knight, but this just made a very, very weak isolated d pawn. So essentially your idea is that you want to split up this black structure, either isolate a pawn on c6, maybe you isolate the pawn on d5, get the semi-open file for your rook, and d3 always gets played to blunt this bishop and stop any kind of active plans here. The opponent got desperate, started sacrificing material, and after some tactics, like this in-between move, which was quite nice, White was simply up an exchange and a pawn and converted the game pretty easily. So that's just one example. That was against the 2300, so a good player with Black couldn't figure out how to deal with this setup effectively. Okay. So I think it's a good idea now, as long as you're happy with it. I don't know if you have any questions about that opening that came up.
I think I had one question actually, but it was in the Mainline.
Okay, that's fine too.
Yeah, can you switch? So there's... Yeah, so in this position, actually, what if they just challenge my knight with the knight c6? Like, should I take the bishop or should I take the knight? Because taking the bishop feels risky. And
well,
taking
for
the
one,
knight
it's not black's
doesn't
move,
make
so
sense.
let's say knight c6. You should capture the knight in this specific position because there's h5. And you can do your thing with this bishop whenever there's h5 available. If they haven't pushed their h-pawn, it's not worth taking the bishop, because then they'll just open the file for their rook, and that can actually be a very good thing for black. So essentially, the rule of thumb, if they've moved their h-pawn, capture the bishop. If they haven't and they try and challenge your knight, then you can leave your knight there, but I would say if they bring it to c6, that doesn't look like a very good square anyway, because you can just capture it and ruin their pawn structure as well. But in this situation as well, you can even play something like this, and this looks very good for white. Black has a bad structure, a knight that can't really move forward, and you can just play like bishop e2, queen d3 and long castles, and
I would have captured. I would have captured with the pawn on c3. I feel like we want to have another pawn.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach. The only thing I would say is maybe the c. Oh no, there's no c5 because c4. You're right. Yeah,
loses a piece.
Yeah, that might win the bishop by force. I think. Yeah, that's a great point. Although there is this. But once again, c4, right? So.
Yeah, we don't have to react.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think you're probably correct. Let's take a look. Yeah, BC plus 2, and bishop takes plus 1.6. So BC very good.
Not a
move.
major difference actually. But does it work? So if we take with the bishop, then it's with tempo. That's why. That's why they don't have the time for knight g4.
Yeah. Well, they don't have the time for knight g4 anyway, because they have to defend this c4 square. But I guess you can play. I was thinking something like rook g1 or rook h2. Engine's giving a weird line. This looks like a serious threat, knight g4. So I'd probably play something like rook h2, but I guess h6, knight g4. There's this, but these are just like calculations that you have to make during the game, because you're not necessarily going to get this position every time. If you are looking to train your calculations, I wouldn't really recommend just memorizing openings. Otherwise, you're probably going to forget your prep at some point, and then that's when things can go very wrong. But yeah,
it makes sense. Okay, no more questions on this one. I think pretty interesting lines. I will learn more on my own.
That sounds good. And so essentially, on the rook endgames, what I wanted to get through was this one in particular. You had this, you made a draw just moving the rook back. I think it was by accident that you made the draw, by the way, because it was a really weird threefold repetition where the initial position didn't, like, you know how you can get those threefolds sometimes where it's like the starting position is repeated via like a different king move. It was one of those ones where you repeated moves.
Didn't go for a draw in this one. Yeah, I wanted to win, but it was hard to figure out like what's the proper approach.
So, what I think you played the right move in the game. King g5 makes the most sense because you want to start pushing forward this pawn. But the issue is once you push the pawn, of course, I'm sure you're aware of this. White would have a check and then win your pawn, which is a problem. Well, actually, they wouldn't because your rook's guarding, but at the very least, they'd be able to cut off your king. So let's say that white does nothing, you push your pawn, they give a check. This is now an easy draw for white. They can just move the rook back and forth. So we understand that.
Yeah.
But what you can go for is try and check the king back with the rook from this side. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to see if you can try and come up with the best defensive moves for white, and I'm going to try and make moves to play for an advantage with black. So I'm going to see, like, because white should be holding, so this should be a good exercise for you to try and hold with white, and also you can try and see how black can attempt to put as much pressure on as possible. Does that sound good?
Yeah, let's try.
All right.
So yeah, I obviously see your threat, the winning my rook. So
yeah.
I would probably plan for something like rook b5, like pinning your pawn so that you cannot push. But the problem is that now my king is like pretty far away. So let's say g2, just to keep the contact with the rook. Okay. And now maybe I don't know, rook c5. Just stay on the same diagonal and on the same file. Yeah, if check, then you push.
Yeah.
Maybe go from the back, from the like c8, rook c8.
This is a good approach as well, but it might run into some problems. We'll see.
Okay, king f1, I guess. And I'm almost getting checkmated. That's hard. Yeah, okay, check with the rook.
And I think this is a mistake.
Losing rook. Yeah, because you kind of want to go there.
Yes.
Yeah, now I have to go somewhere with the king, something like king g1. Yeah, king.
And now you might know this position. I'm pretty sure this is a theoretical win for black. And the point is that black is going to make a checkmate threat against your king. And so if you start to move the king up, then there's a check, and you would lose your rook. And if you just move your rook somewhere, let's say here, actually, the king moving up might have not been the best move. The move might have been rook here, actually, or some waiting moves. I think I think king here is correct, but you might actually still be holding if you start moving your rook around. So I'll let you continue. But
yeah, I would check maybe rook g2 and then rook b2.
That's fair.
Rook b2. No, b2.
Rook b2.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'll go for something like this. Point being that I want to trade rooks.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. Yeah, tough. King h3. Oops. Okay. Yeah, it's forced. I mean, yeah. Okay, something else. But I don't think I have any moves. Let's just wait with rook c2.
Yeah, but now rook c2.
I mean, it forces. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's lost already.
I don't know if it is lost. I think you might be able to. You can give rook b3, and then go back. Oh no, you can't go back with rook e2. So I guess you might have to play. Oh no, what am I doing?
Yeah, it's really hard to hold.
That's basically the point I'm trying to get at, is that it's hard to hold. I'm not trying to show you how to. I can show you how to hold with white, but what I'm saying is if you don't have the correct knowledge to hold with white, then it's super difficult. But I'm going to go back to the original position. Basically, black can try and put pressure. You just have to try and come up with ways to push the king to any side of the board. Use your pawn as a shield to hide from checks from behind. And then once your pawn gets far enough up, any threat of trading rooks is very serious. So you want to be threatening to trade rooks whenever possible. And you want to try and create a situation where their king is locked out. So for example, if their king was over here, this would be very bad for white. And I was thinking, yeah, the only reason why I think this is holdable potentially is because your rook is on this g file. If my rook was over on the g file and your rook was somewhere else, then that would instantly, I think, that might not be completely lost, but it'd be very close to losing because your king can't get back to the defense of the pawn. But I'm going to show you the absolute best way to hold for white, which is basically you just want to leave the king to a passive defense and put the rook on the second rank. And this might look super unintuitive. By the way, there's only one drawing move here. You did just see it, but I would like you to say why the others lose. The first one's obvious. I think this one, why it loses.
The rook?
Yeah, it loses the rook. But then this one.
King g3 and it's almost checkmate.
If you go king g3, there's actually... Wait, no, the funny trick doesn't work on this one. I guess you can play this, but you are correct that at the end of the day, you're going to win the rook. So, yeah, pretty much. But the more forcing line is just to check, win the rook. But king g3 wins too. So the only move is to go king g1. But once you get to this position specifically, there's actually only one move that draws for white here. And I'd like you to try and find it. And there's no other way for black to make progress other than to make this threat with king g3.
Okay, only one move that draws. Okay. I mean, I'm looking at pinning the pawn, but and I'm looking for a response for black. Yeah, rook h4 maybe. Even here, but here I can take the pawn. Huh?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Actually, not. Yeah, it's probably trying to go back and around. So after this,
even something simple like rook h4, like just to keep your rook close to the to the king, just in case.
And then let's say, what's white going to do next? You just want to maintain the pin, or?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, now I have to go to b1, but then you do the push.
Wait, and then
I think if you push, I go to f1.
Yeah. Generally, you want the rook to be around. If the rook was on h4 and you could push, then you would be able to deliver the check. So I think in this instance, the move would be rook a2 and then rook h2. And the reason for this is that now if the rook leaves, then it's a checkmate. And if the rook stays, then it's rook h2 and now f2. Oh, wait, now we've just gone round in a circle, actually.
Yeah, that's not...
Is this draw? No, this is apparently lost. Oh. Wait, but if you just hold it?
It's mate in 2. Oh my god. Okay, mate in 20.
I'm sorry, I'm not entirely sure why this is losing. Okay, that makes that makes a lot of sense. Basically, the engine was looking to try and get a position where the rook goes here. You want to deliver this check and then deliver this move with check so that you get the position of king g1 with the rook on h2 and then can go f2 and win the rook.
Yeah, so I think what's important here is to push the pawn with check, because if you push the pawn without the check, then
there's this move.
Yeah.
But let's go all the way back, because there was one drawing move which can mean that we don't have to. Oh, okay. There was a drawing move that means you don't have to suffer through all of that.
Okay, so pinning the pawn is not the move.
No.
No. Really? Stalemate trick?
Yeah.
Rook g2?
Rook g2. If you take it stalemate, and if the king ever moves back, then you can just move your rook back. There's no way to make progress, because if you move the king here, then you're just delivering checks from the side, and the king is running around, has nowhere to go, because the only shelter is on the short side, and every time the king goes back to g3, you can just sack your rook. That's essentially it. You just hold the second rank, sack the rook if the king comes over here. If the king comes this way, you deliver checks from the side.
I see that you're trying to get this position where the rook is on the same file as the pawn. Not the file, but on the same row. Is this like some sort of a theoretical position?
This
have a name?
This is a theoretical trick. Yeah. This is a position. I think it might be in Dvoretsky Endgame manual, but this is a known way that you can play. This is not quite passive defense because passive defense is on the first rank, but this is like a second rank version of passive defense, which doesn't work with all the pawns. It only works with the F pawns and the C pawns. So it's not super versatile, but it's definitely, I think, a trick that you should be aware of, or at least being aware of the fact you can go for these stalemate
I'm
tricks.
not talking about the trick. I'm talking about the, like, from the black perspective. When you want to win this position, you want to have this position, but just make sure that this trick doesn't work, right?
Well, there isn't really any situation where the trick doesn't work. That's the problem. Because, yeah.
But there's no other way to make the progress. That's why you play.
No, it's a draw. Yeah. This is what I was getting at earlier when I was saying that these positions with the one pawn versus king and rook, they aren't winning, but that doesn't matter because you can still put so many practical challenges on your way there. Like we just showed by going through that example where I wasn't really sure what necessarily the best defense is for white, just because there's so many different variations and like ways that you can have the differences between the F pawn and the G pawn and the E pawn and so on, and like different move orders, tempo for tempo kind of stuff, that there's just a lot of ways that you can try and push these pawn up positions to the very end rather than just making the draw immediately. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. One more question. So essentially my move was losing, right? My move
yes,
was
this line is
A3.
Not. Well, your line isn't actually losing, and the reason for that is because you can actually go with the rook back here. And if they were to go around, then this trick still works.
Okay.
But if you don't know about the trick, the position's lost.
Yeah. It's like, practically speaking, it's really hard to hold. Like, practically speaking, when you're down a pawn and in similar position and the pawn is not actually on the H file or A file, it's really, really hard to hold.
Yeah, well, if the pawn's on the H, G, B, or A file, it's a super easy draw. If it's on these center files, it's a little bit harder. And let me just try and shift the pawn over. This won't take long at all, but I'm going to show you how you can basically instantly put away these B and G file ones. I don't know, have you heard of the passive defense?
No, I mean, from you a couple of minutes ago, from the last rank.
Yeah. So essentially, the idea of the passive defense is that there's a rook here. Let's say something like this. And basically, this position is a complete draw, and the rook can literally just move on the last rank, and white can't make any progress.
Okay. So it works with A, B, G, H files, right?
Yes. And the reason you can't make progress is because once this pawn moves forward, in the other lines, there was a way for the king to move on this side, but because the king hasn't got any more board, it can't run off onto like the outside of the board. It has no shelter, and so you'll just be able to check it away every single time. So that's essentially the reason why passive defense works in this example, but not in the other ones. And there's also some situations of where you can check and win the rook. Like, for example, if the king was here and you were to check it and then you go back, that would be a checkmate, but you can never force the king out of this square here. Unlike in the other situation where you can threaten the checkmate from this side, force the king to move over, deliver the check, force the king back, and then win the rook. Right.
Yeah, makes sense.
So final, I'll just do this one very, very quickly, and then we can try and get through the like calculation exercise. But I'm just going to show you. Black only has one way to hold this. I'll give you a quick attempt at it. I'm going to fast forward a couple of moves to this position. Let's say right here. What is the only way that the only idea that black has to hold this? The position remains a draw for quite a few moves, but there's only one idea that black can execute to make this draw. Because you might notice this position looks very similar to the Lucina position, except in the Lucina position, the pawn is here, the king is here, and the black rook is like somewhere on the back rank. But black still has a little bit of time to try and save this game. I'm going to see if you can find it.
Yeah, so I'm looking at exchanging rooks, and given that my king is already there, maybe I will be able to like do the opposition and somehow stop the pawn. Okay, you are not doing that. Why you are not collaborating?
Well, I'm not going to exchange the rooks because you are correct. That is a draw, because if we go for this, wait, it wouldn't actually be that move. It would have to be.
No, I mean, if you go to d5, I will go to d7. Yeah, I think it's a draw.
You have to get the right square, so you have to be careful. Actually, there's only one drawing move here.
I feel like it's e7, but
what did you say? You think it's this? Now I'm going to go here though. And you should be familiar.
Yeah, if e8, then you go to e6.
This is a win for white because you have the opposition. Yeah. So there's only one drawing move from this position, and it uses a concept called distant opposition. So that should be all you need to know.
Yeah, I thought that the e7 is actually the distant opposition, but you are getting the proper opposition after e7.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we want to try to triangulate here somehow. So I'm looking at something like d8 and then e7.
It's king d8. And the reason is because you're now maintaining distant opposition with the white king. So if the white king moves anywhere forward, like this, now you walk into the opposition, you claim it. If the white king goes here, you walk into the opposition and you claim it. And funnily enough, and if you push the pawn, then of course this is easy because the white king is not in front of the pawn, and you should. I'm sure you know this idea.
Yeah, it's just draw.
Oh wait, no, that's actually how you lose. You meant to go to e8. You have to stay directly behind the pawn, and then this is the famous draw. But funnily enough, if black goes here, and then white goes here, how do you maintain the distant opposition?
Should we go to? So
wait, you don't have to maintain distant opposition. Sorry, but how do you maintain opposition?
Yeah. Yeah, my intuition tells me to go to d7, but let me calculate for
this is correct. This is called diagonal opposition. And the point is that if the king goes here, once again, you reclaim opposition. And if in here, then it's here. And it's the same drawing idea. And if the king goes back, you reclaim distant opposition again. So that would be a draw. And if the king goes back...
my intuition works.
Yeah, it's useful when it works. Let's say the king goes back.
Yeah, I think d7 again. No? d7 here. Can we go to c6 here?
Yeah.
c6 check.
Same business. So I just thought that concept of distant opposition and king to d8 being the only drawing move was something quite interesting to pick up on. But let's go just quickly back to this position. How are you meant to play this after the king moves up?
Yeah. I don't know. Rook a8, and the reason is that if you push, I want to check. If you go with the king, I want to check and take the rook.
So, what about this?
If I go to e8, you're able to. Yeah. Oh my god. Huh. Okay, I should not take the rook then.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. After you go for this here and here, I think that this is losing because you're going to keep giving checks, and then this pawn is made it, and we are going to reach the Lucina position where I just build the bridge. Your king is cut off, and white will win the game. So once again, there's only one drawing idea from this position, and what you need to be able to do is it's actually only two things you have to calculate, and you just have to recognize the drawn king and pawn endgames that we were talking about before. So I think
E6. Rook E6 maybe.
Rook E6 maybe here.
I thought that you will take at this point.
No, actually, you're correct. This does draw as well. But essentially,
Can you check with the engine, by the way, just to make sure, because I'm not so sure.
yeah, I think rook E6 draws. King here,
Okay.
and then you trade the rooks, and you gain the opposition.
I wasn't sure because maybe there are like some tricky white king moves to get the opposition from the white side.
Yeah, well,
It's like there are no.
once you can recognize the king and pawn endgames, you can normally tell pretty quickly which ones are drawn and which ones aren't. But so in this particular case, the easiest way is just to exchange the rooks, and whichever way you take, opposition is gained. And if you take with the pawn, once again, the pawn is now in front of the king, and this is an easy draw for black. So I really just thought that this particular rook endgame was quite a nice segue into concepts like distant opposition and king and pawn endgames, as well as having the confidence in these rook endgames, which generally there is a rule in rook endgames that you shouldn't transition into the king and pawn endgame. But often, if guaranteed these rules, you can trade into the instant draw. And in some cases, like this one, the only way to play it is to trade into the drawn king and pawn endgame. Right.
Interesting. So would you advise to not trade rooks if you're pawn up in the rook endgame? Like,
no, pretty much in almost all cases, the person who's up a pawn wants to exchange rooks, because most of the time being up the pawn in the king and pawn endgame is a win if the king is in front of the pawn. But you'll have to verify every single time. So every time you offer an exchange of rooks, you'll have to check whether or not it is winning, who gains the opposition, and so on and so on. And with black, you've got to do the same thing. Can I exchange rooks in this position? But black, most of the time, if they're down a pawn, you want to try and keep rooks on the board, because that can often make the defenses like passive defense or active defense from behind, for example, lateral defense as well. You just have a lot more opportunities to make the draw. Whereas once the rooks come off, everything becomes super black and white. It's either a draw or you're losing. But with the rooks on, there's a little bit more flexibility.
Okay, makes sense.
Do you have any other questions about these kind of rook endgames?
I think, I think it's clear. I mean, I was already familiar with the concept of opposition. It's just that, it was a nice thing to see. The previous the previous positions were quite interesting, because this one is pure calculation. Like you just need to. It's at least it's not that hard to calculate those positions with like 3 pieces on the board. Like okay, you either take or you either not take, and there's not so many like options for you to go. But the previous ones, like how to defend against the pawn with the rook, it was like harder.
Yeah, I think that's good. I also think, just in particular, this one concept of the distant opposition making the move king d8, I think is just like really nice and instructive, because everyone's instinct is to play these two moves that are going up towards the pawn. But the only draw, as you can see, the engine is confirming, is this move, just moving the king to the side, which looks like it doesn't make any sense. But everything makes sense when it's played concretely in the king and pawn games. Okay, so on to the calculation exercise. You played the move bishop to e6 to start off. This actually isn't where the calculation starts. I just wanted to make you aware. If you're getting this, you get this position a lot, you find, with black. This one, because they go for like the knight exchange, put the queen in the middle, get you to play f6 and all that.
I wouldn't say a lot, but sometimes, yeah, sometimes I do, and in general, I don't really like it.
Yeah. Well, the way you can play it for a very comfortable position is actually to play this move e5 and then bishop to e6. And you can see that once this has happened, you've basically fully consolidated your position. You have a nice space advantage. f5 can be played in the future. You just go bishop g7 castles. You go like f5, e4. You can also use this b file to attack down the pawns. And black is actually a fair bit better in these positions. But once you play the move bishop to... Sorry.
I think this position was actually in your lesson with
the
dragon.
Yeah. This e5 move.
I remember this one, yeah.
But you went for bishop to e6, which is not a terrible move. It's a little bit of it's a slow version, because now you're going to have to play bishop f7 before going e5. Anyway, they castled rook e1 and played this move queen c5, and you responded with queen d7. And here, my question to you is, what is the winning continuation for white? I'll give you a small hint that the theme is deflection.
Yeah, for some reason I kind of see that there's a lot of pressure on the e7 pawn, and it's defended by the knight, which can be captured, and by the queen. So yeah, I'm looking at taking the knight and then playing something like bishop f4, but queen can just move. So that's not entirely... Yeah, that's not the move, I think. Take. Yeah, I also see that kind of if this bishop can be taken, then queen is not defended, so this pawn is like pinned to the queen.
That's a good point.
So maybe take and something simple like knight c3, but I mean it can be defended with the...
With e6 as well, yeah.
Yeah, or rook d8 or whatever.
Yeah, or rook, yeah. You're correct about the first move, but I think you have to make one more observation, which is the weakness of this c6 pawn, and the fact that the queen is overloaded. It's defending both e7 and c6. So I think this is the final hint that I'm going to drop, and let's see if we can go from there.
The queen is overloaded, but I mean after the capture, the bishop defends the pawn, so I don't really see that. I mean,
is there a way you can quickly move the bishop out though?
Yeah, I mean c4. I was looking at c4, but how does this help?
Let's say the bishop goes back to f7. So the resulting position...
Oh my god, we can take, I mean, with the rook on, yeah. We can take queen takes, then queen takes on c6, and yeah.
Yeah, and after the king moves up...
No, king cannot move there.
After you take the rook.
After taking the rook. I mean, just exchange queens, I guess. queen b7 and then take the queen, maybe.
Yep.
Yeah.
And all you have to do at that point is just say, evaluate, I've now won 3 pawns. I'm in an endgame, and this is easy. And there's a better way that you can play after king d7, but it doesn't actually matter because you've got what I and other coaches, like Nick Sands, I'm taking a term from him again, which is the minimal program. Which is that you've seen that you've won 3 pawns, and it doesn't really matter because you found your this is the worst case scenario, is I'm going to an endgame up 3 pawns, and that's a pretty good situation. So yeah, it's actually just quite a nice line, putting it so that everyone can see it clearly. You're deflecting the queen away from a forkable square from which the king can move if the king goes to f8 or d8, doesn't matter. If the queen blocks, it also doesn't matter. You'll just take here. And I guess the only important thing you had to notice is that the queen can go back to e4 with a check. If that wasn't possible, that would actually be losing, by the way, which is pretty crazy because there's back rank threatened and the queen is hanging. So you have to actually make sure that you have this move queen checks, and then knight c3 can be played to guard the back rank. You're up 2 pawns, and that is a sufficient winning advantage. So yeah, I don't know if you have any more questions about that tactic in particular.
No, I mean, this one is, it was hard to see because it requires a lot of like components. So first we have to take the knight, then we have to move the bishop somehow back. And for me, I already see it like not the first time, that for me it's hard to see these like weakening pawn moves. I'm so, for some reason, I'm just like, I'm very afraid to play them, and I think I need to be more like concrete in my calculations.
Wait, do you mean like c4?
Yeah, c4.
I don't really see c4 as particularly weakening, because I don't say it's weakening if your king's on that side of the board, really.
Yeah, I mean, but as an accelerated dragon player, I kind of don't like to push c4 because it weakens b pawn, and then this whole diagonal kind of can get weak. So that's why.
That's fair enough, yeah. But I think you're onto something here, which is that the important takeaway is that if you can calculate these forcing lines to the end, then you can often come up with what might be unintuitive solutions, or solutions where you're playing moves that you would normally say are bad, or might break the rules, the conventional rules. But once you get into the minutiae and the moves themselves, you actually see that they are, concretely they work out. So even a move like bishop takes d5, this is a move that I would almost never consider unless I have a very clear follow-up. I'm giving a bishop for a knight. That doesn't, like, that goes against what I would normally do as a chess player. But if you can make the right observations, like the fact that this queen is overloaded, the only piece defending e7 is the knight. And so you can say, okay, let's eliminate the knight. And now the c6 pawn and the e7 pawns are overloaded. The only piece defending c6, other than the queen, is the bishop. So let's kick the bishop away. And once the bishop moves away, of course, your plan has now fully come into place. Rook sack and check to fork. So I think at the basis of every single tactic is an observation that you have to make. In this position, the observation is an overloaded queen and a forkable square. When you put those two things together, you can try and find the right forcing moves to make things work.
Yeah. This quite deep, this calculation exercise. That's why it was hard to see.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty instructive one.
Yeah, I thought it was nice.
Yeah, thank you for the lesson. I think I don't really have any more questions, and we are, as usual, overdue. The lesson
Only a little
was
bit
longer than expected, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. well, that's all good. Thank you for everyone that watched up to this point on the YouTube video. If you did, maybe leave a comment, let us know how far you made it. And yeah, other than that, thanks